Good morning, Captain.
Good morning, Captain.
Good morning, Captain.
Airline Pilot Guy, episode number 78.
Flight 209, you're clear for takeoff.
Roger.
LA, good morning. 123.9.
Roger. Request detected.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from my side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from Studio 6132 of the Rosen Shingle Creek Hotel in Orlando, Florida. In this episode, airlines hitting cows, ELT inspections, Wiener's laws, no, not the one from New York, VATSIM, Able Flight, stuttering is cool, lots more feedback, and much more. So get all settled in. Tray tables and seat backs in their upright and locked positions. Tray tables, no, electronic devices powered on. Flight 78 is ready for takeoff. Hello everyone, and welcome back, or welcome to the Airline Pilot Guy Show. I'm Captain Jeff, a proud line pilot flying for Acme Airlines. And I'm not an official spokesperson for any real airline out there. Never have been authorized to do that, and I hope that I never am really one, because then I'd have to be responsible about what I say. The things that I talk about on this show are just from my perspective and my personal opinion. I say the view from my side of the cockpit door. I do not try to portray or represent all of the tens of thousands of professional airline pilots out there. It's just my opinion. And I think that a lot of my opinions are shared by a lot of my peers, but just wanted to get that straight, just to make sure that nobody is thinking that I'm some kind of an official authority or spokesperson. So, I don't believe I have any corrections on this particular episode, so I'll go right to this.
A cup of coffee in the morning, and I get the paper. I check the headlines and decide that I am bored. I check my email and I decide to answer later. Another cup of coffee and I drag myself to work.
Yes, another, thought I'd mix it up a little bit. This is Josh Woodward. This is PodSafe Music, and the name of this is Coffee. And yes, you're right, I'm going to talk about my coffee fund. I would like to thank everyone who has contributed since the last episode, and those folks are Justin, Conrad, Isaac, and Todd. Thank you very much for your support for my coffee addiction, my beer drinking addiction, and also, of course, it helps pay for the server costs for my media files and my website hosting and all that. So, do appreciate it, and this drink's for you. All right. Thank you, Josh. And next, as long as we're getting all this out of the way at the beginning. You hear those drops? Yes, Dropbox. I would like to thank Luis, Erica, Mark, and Laura for your taking me up on using my referral link for Dropbox. And now I'm up to like over 12 gigabytes of storage on Dropbox. Thank you so much. Really helps out with my production. And yeah, I think that that's probably more than enough for storage. And so thank you everybody out there who has used that referral code for Dropbox. Now, we are finished with our our administrative tasks at the beginning of the show here. And let's start off with talking about the latest, or some of the latest, in aviation news. An update on the Southwest Airlines nose first landing, allegedly, in New York at LaGuardia. The latest update issued Tuesday afternoon, the NTSB said the captain of the Southwest Airlines 737 that landed nose wheel first at New York's LaGuardia Airport on July 22nd had taken over control from the first officer at a point below 400 feet as the jet approached for landing. It was the first time the two pilots had flown together. And at this point, the NTSB says that in this point in their investigation, no mechanical anomalies or malfunctions have been found. A preliminary examination of the nose gear indicated that it failed due to a stress overload. And that is from the National Transportation Safety Board, and that's not Captain Jeff throwing Southwest Airline pilots under the bus. I have never, ever thrown anybody under a bus. So, there. All right. Let's see. In the House of Representatives of the United States of America, they agreed on Tuesday, the 30th of July, by voice vote to pass an amendment by Representative Jackie Speer that would require the Federal Aviation Administration to study whether existing commercial aircraft should be required to install low-speed or low airspeed voice warning systems. And let's see, this is a quote from Speer, a Democrat from San Mateo. Pilots make life or death decisions in a matter of seconds. It is vital that planes have alerts that are instantly recognizable, clear, and unambiguous. After numerous incidents and nearly a decade of concerns, the FAA continues to drag its feet on the question of low airspeed warning systems. Now, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think we already have low airspeed warning systems in the airplanes. It's called stall warning systems and stick shakers and things that warn us when the airplane is getting dangerously slow. Obviously, this is a reaction to the Asiana 214 crash at San Francisco. And I don't know. What do you think? Do we need another warning system on the airplane? Now, granted, a lot of crashes have occurred in the past, and we do have warning systems now to warn us of situations that are getting dangerous. So perhaps this is a good thing. I don't know. I just think that it's kind of redundant, really. But there you go. Several of you sent me emails and feedback regarding an evacuation of an Allegiant MD-83 near Albany, Georgia. They were traveling from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to St. Petersburg, Florida, with 155 passengers and 6 crew. They were at 33,000 feet, about 70 nautical miles northwest of Albany, Georgia, and that's in the United States, when the crew received a cargo fire indication and diverted to Albany for a safe landing of 16 minutes later. That's pretty good, from 33,000 feet to airport elevation, which in that area, the state of Georgia, is pretty darn close to sea level. The aircraft was evacuated on the runway. No injuries occurred. Emergency services found no trace of fire, heat, or smoke. And then the remainder of the flight was canceled, and the passengers were bused to St. Petersburg. Now, reading some of the comments in the Aviation Herald, some people were kind of slamming the crew for landing, of all places, Albany, Georgia, late at night, and having to get a bus to travel, get the passengers to their destination. You know what? You're on an airplane and you have an indication of fire. I think these folks, this crew, did a great job. You don't want to mess with fire on an airplane. Think value jet over the Everglades, and nobody survived that one. When I have a fire on an airplane, I'm going to act, and then people can ask questions later. Evidently, they considered that Albany, Georgia was the closest suitable airport to land as soon as conditions permit. They got it on the ground. Nobody was injured. It's hard to fault them for that. And then some people were saying, well, what about flying another airplane in? And, thinking that we airlines or our airlines have airplanes standing by, crews standing by to do this sort of thing. No, especially a smaller airline like Allegiant. It's not like there's somebody on ready standby in the alert pad ready to go out there and do this kind of thing. By the time they get a crew, an airplane, flight plan, fueled, prepared, flown to Albany, Georgia to pick up the passengers, and then do the same thing for their flight from Albany to St. Petersburg, well, you know what? It's probably all of a wash as far as getting buses to come in and take the passengers. Yeah, it was several hours later by the time the passengers got to their destination, but they did the job. They got them where they wanted to be, and they got them there safely. Now, had that really been a fire, it would have been imperative that they get on the ground as quickly as possible. So when we're up there, we get a warning. We have to assume that it's a real fire, and we have to get the airplane on the ground before it gets to the point where we crash. So good job for those guys. Hey, are you a Canadian pilot? Did you know that your aviation document booklet? I didn't even know what an aviation document booklet was until I read this article. Apparently, it's for flight crew members and air traffic controllers. They use it as evidence that they have qualified for certain aviation-related permits, licenses, medical certificates, and ratings. And it's, I guess, some kind of a booklet form that they're supposed to have. And this fall, pilots, flight engineers, and air traffic controllers will begin renewing their aviation document booklets. Transport Canada first introduced in 2008 with a 5-year expiration date. Thus, the majority of ADB holders will need to renew their booklets this year. So if you're listening, and you probably already know this, but you're a pilot or flight engineer or air traffic controller, and you are a resident of Canada, you need to make sure that you don't let that expire. That's a public service announcement from Captain Jeff, Airline Pilot Guy. Okay, of course we have to have a 787 update. This is not specifically regarding the 787, although it was spurred by the incident, the Ethiopian Airlines 787 Dreamliner that caught on fire at Heathrow, and they finally identified the faulty component, they think, was the emergency locator transmitter, and Boeing has asked airlines to inspect their emergency beacons on a range of planes. It turns out that not only is this particular model used on the 787, but also the Boeing 717, the next generation 737s, the 747-400, the 767, and the 777. Investigators are trying to determine whether two wires smashed under a cover on an emergency locator transmitter caused a short circuit that triggered the blaze on the Ethiopian Airlines 787. ANA last week found a dented wire in a fixed beacon and another in a portable beacon, and removed all beacons from 8 787s used on domestic routes. United also found a pinched wire in a beacon, which it replaced and returned to the manufacturer for evaluation. Approximately 6,000 ELTs of this type have been manufactured and have been put into service. And speaking of the Ethiopian 787, I saw an article about this and had talked about it before in a previous podcast as far as the difficulty they're going to have repairing this area of the fuselage that suffered the the burn through, basically, of the carbon fiber composite skin. And I think some people are speculating now that they're going to actually have to replace the entire fuselage section. I guess not the whole fuselage, but that section back toward the back of the airplane and the crown, where the vertical stabilizer connects and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be an interesting challenge for Boeing to repair this thing. So we'll see how that goes. And I mentioned in the teaser that I was going to talk about Wiener, or at least Wiener's laws. And no, I'm not talking about the guy that's running for mayor of New York City. This is a gentleman who is a renowned aviation human factors guru. His name is Earl Wiener. He passed away not too long ago after, let's see, on just not long ago at all, June 14th. He was 80 years old, the victim of a long bout with Parkinson's disease. And so he, as I mentioned, an aviation human factors guru, and along with his family, books, and scholarly papers, and a new generation of human factors professionals, Wiener left us with Wiener's Laws, 15 jewels of wisdom that will keep giving for decades to come, because human nature, hence human error, is not changing all that rapidly. And I got this from a blog, and they're numbered starting at number 17. And it says, note, numbers 1 through 16 were intentionally left blank. So I don't know what the first 16 laws are, but let's start with number 17. Every device creates its own opportunity for human error. 18. Exotic devices create exotic problems. 19. Digital devices tune out small errors while creating opportunities for large errors. 20. Complacency? Don't worry about it. Number 21. In aviation, there is no problem so great or so complex that it cannot be blamed on a pilot. Number 22. There is no simple solution out there waiting to be discovered, so don't waste your time searching for it. Number 23. Invention is the mother of necessity. 24. If at first you don't succeed, try a new system or a different approach. Number 25. Some problems have no solution. If you encounter one of these, you can always convene a committee to revise some checklist. And those of you out there who are in, especially in the airlines, understand that must really be a real rule. Okay? Again, some problems have no solution. If you encounter one of these, you can always convene a committee to revise some checklist. 26. In God we trust. Everything else must be brought into your scan. Number 27. It takes an airplane to bring out the worst in a pilot. Number 28. Any pilot who can be replaced by a computer should be. That's my favorite. Again, any pilot who can be replaced by a computer should be. Think about it. Number 29. Whenever you solve a problem, you usually create one. You can only hope that the one you created is less critical than the one you eliminated. Number 30. You can never be too rich or too thin or too careful what you put into a digital flight guidance system. Number 31. Today's nifty voluntary system is tomorrow's federal aviation regulation. So there you have it. Wiener's, 15 laws? I'll have a link to that in the show notes. And rest in peace, sir. You did a lot of great work in human factors engineering. Okay, let me look through here and make sure that there's... Oh, you know what? There is something in the news I wanted to talk about. And let me get over here to this. It is right here. Yeah, that was a cow. A Lion Air Boeing 737-800 performing flight 892 from Ujung Padang to Gorontalo, Indonesia, with 110 passengers and 7 crew, landed on Gorontalo's runway at 2111 local, but hit a number of cows before coming to a stop past the runway end, with a cow embedded and killed under the main gear. Yes, rest in peace, Mr. Cow. No injuries occurred on board the aircraft. The aircraft sustained minor damage. Apparently, it got caught up in the main landing gear system, affected the braking capability of the airplane, and they ended up going a little bit past the end of the runway. So they overran the runway. So that's my little bit of aviation news in Indonesia. Let me look through here. I have a bunch of tabs on my internet browser, my Chrome browser. I just want to make sure that I'm not skipping anything. Oh, here. Another thing that a couple of you sent me. One of them, or one of whom, is Inge in the Netherlands, and the other, my good friend Jimmy Aiken. Inge's my good friend too. But Jimmy made a couple of promos for me. Let me play one for you.
Attention passengers, this is Jimmy Aiken of the Jimmy Aiken Podcast, and you're listening to Captain Jeff, the Airline Pilot Guy. The use of approved portable electronic devices is now permitted.
Thank you, Jimmy. And he is the host of the Jimmy Aiken Podcast at jimmyaikenpodcast.com. And both of them sent me a link to this article, and this is from, well, a couple different sources. The title of the article, Greater Safety in Aviation, Detecting Turbulence in Advance. Many aircraft passengers are familiar with the phenomenon. The sky is clear and blue, the aircraft is cruising calmly, but suddenly everything is disrupted by temporary turbulence. Passengers frequently experience this kind of hole in the air, or air pocket, a lot of people call it. And the reason for this unpleasant change in flight altitude is something known as clear air turbulence, or CAT. And that is turbulence that occurs outside of cloud cover or convective or thunderstorm activity. It's invisible and cannot be accurately predicted. And this company has come up with a technology and a device that uses laser. It's a laser-based measurement device, LiDAR, light detection and ranging instrument. It can be installed on board an aircraft and emits shortwave ultraviolet laser radiation along the direction of flight. The density of the air is determined from the backscatter value measured for the air molecules, oxygen and nitrogen. Fluctuations in this density then provide information about the turbulence there. This indirectly acquired information enables analysis of the air in the region the aircraft is about to fly through. In other words, clear air turbulence is made visible in advance along the route. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to continue to develop this technology, and this is something that I'll get a chance to experience in my future before I retire. And this will be a major help in helping us see turbulence before we enter it, and we can get that seatbelt light on and hope that when we tell our flight attendants to take their seats and put their seatbelts on, that they will actually listen to us. And that goes for the passengers as well. So thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Inge, for sending me that link to this new clear air turbulence detection technology. I do appreciate it. Okay, let's see. Let me get back over here to this and make sure I haven't skipped anything. Let's see. Oh, just getting back to the Asiana thing, you'll remember that they were on a visual approach, and they got slow and low. And since then, the tower folks at San Francisco have noticed several airplanes having to perform go-arounds and missed approaches. And finally, they decided, maybe we should institute a new rule. And they are saying now that non-U.S. carriers landing at San Francisco International Airport will have to use GPS systems when landing. Let's see, according to John Nance, the FAA has done a good thing here. They've got enough of our tower operators that can tell you when you assign a visual approach to these pilots from foreign carriers. They're all over the sky. That's a quote from him, not me. Let's see. Nance, an aviation safety consultant, said the Asiana case underscored the danger of an over-dependence on technology. Here's another quote from him. In Asiana, you had two senior pilots up there who weren't really pilots. They were systems operators. This has nothing to do with intellect. It is a major disconnect between policies that the nations and the International Civil Aviation Organization and basically the world's airlines have signed on to with increasing automation. The next step should include barring all foreign carriers from flying into the United States until their pilots are properly trained to fly under visual conditions. With technology always vulnerable to failure, pilots need the skills to fly manually so they can handle emergency situations. And finally, the last quote from John, if we're going to put a pilot up here, we need to have him or her knowledgeable of what it means to be a pilot. That means when everything else goes to heck in a handbasket, you know how to fly the airplane. Hear, hear, thank you for saying what needs to be said. And you know what? It's even happening here in the U.S. Companies are putting more and more and more emphasis on all this automation because the perception is that they're going to be able to save a little extra fuel by utilizing these systems, essentially forcing us to use these systems all the time. In fact, some airlines, I was told by a jump seater, I don't know if I mentioned this on the last podcast or not, I don't think I did, flying from Miami to Atlanta, guy on the jump seat is in the midst of training on the Airbus, and I'm not going to mention the airline that he's part of, but it's a major airline here in the United States. He's going through Airbus 320 training. And he said that they will not let them hand fly the airplane. They will not let them turn off the auto throttles. It's forbidden for him to even think about it. So let me think here. How are we going to know how to fly the airplane when we're not even allowed to do it? It's, again, not a good direction here. We need, again, I'm not saying that we need to remove all the FMSs and autopilots from airplanes. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we need to practice. The FAA has told us, the NTSB has told us, numerous accidents over the last few decades have shown us and proved to us that pilots are forgetting how to fly, and we need to practice. Practice makes perfect, right? So you out there who are professional pilots, flying for the airlines, corporate, whatever, turn the darn thing off occasionally. When appropriate, practice. Yeah, you might embarrass yourself. I have a feeling that some of you listening and some of you out there who are listening and fly with others are going to be reluctant to do this because it's been such a long time since you've actually hand-flown a jet, and you might be embarrassed how rusty your skills are, but you just need to do it for the sake of the safety of the public. Just do it, okay? All right, that's enough. Let's get on with feedback.
Captain, incoming message.
Okay, let's start with Evan sent me this feedback a while back, and he said he sent this to me on my website, I believe. Oh, by the way, speaking of feedback, yeah, I'm still terribly backlogged, and I have finally come to that point, as I've mentioned before in previous podcasts, that I can't answer everybody's feedback anymore. And I can't even personally send you email feedback, although I try to do that. Reply to your feedback to me. But I may not get around to doing that as well. I just have too many things going on, like flying airplanes and stuff. And then all the things I have to do when I'm at home. So if you send me email feedback, if you send me comments on the website, if you send me something on my Airline Pilot Guy Facebook page, or even something on Twitter, which many of you know I hardly ever check. I read it, I really do, but I may not have a chance to respond to it. I do appreciate you, and I appreciate your feedback, and I'm doing my darndest to get it all answered, but I just can't do it anymore, and I'm not even going to try anymore. So just wanted to let you know, though. Don't think that when you send me something that I'm just deleting it without looking at it. I'm actually reading it and trying to respond to it. So let's get on with Evan. And he says, "Hey, Captain Jeff, I just had a few quick questions about commercial aviation. First, how does hail affect an airplane parked on the ground? Does it get dented like a car, or is the skin too strong for that? Second, are small private hang gliders controlled by ATC? During a recent flight in Europe, I saw a tiny hang glider launch off a mountain just a few thousand feet below. It looked like it was open and just a tiny private-owned craft. Would that fall under different regulations? Wishing you clear skies, Evan." Thank you, Evan, for your feedback. Okay, your first question. Does hail affect an airplane parked on the ground? Yes, it does, depending on the severity, the size of the hail and the severity of the hailstorm. There have been many airplanes damaged while parked and many airplanes damaged while flying, which is even a greater hazard. I remember taxiing out years ago at Denver Stapleton, the old Denver Stapleton Airport, not the new Denver International Airport. And there was one of those, Colorado Rocky thunderstorms coming in. And all of a sudden, it was just like all heck broke loose because hailstones were hitting the top of our airplane, and it just made quite a racket. And I'm thinking, wow, this must be really damaging the airplane. Now, we did an inspection. It didn't really do any damage at all to the skin of the airplane, thankfully. But everybody, and I mean everybody, was saying, we're going to stay put because associated with this hail, if you're getting hail from a thunderstorm, chances are you're going to experience some other severe effects from that thunderstorm, including wind shear. And everybody was kind of pulling off to the side and waiting for this thing to pass. And the tower said, "Anybody out there want to take off?" And I forgot what the airline it was, some small commuter airline flying a Beechcraft 1900 said that they would go. You should have seen all of us in the cockpit. We kind of looked at each other like, are you kidding me? This guy is going to take off and hail is coming down from the sky. There's just this super dark thunderstorm off in the distance, and this guy is going to take off in this? Is he nuts? So off they go. And guess what? About 10 minutes later, we hear them back on frequency. We see emergency vehicles heading out to the runway, and they ended up getting hit by hail, took out their windscreen, and they lost pressurization. They couldn't see, hardly see. The windscreen was completely obliterated by the hail, and they were an emergency aircraft, and they landed safely. But we all thought to ourselves, what was the point of that? Why would you take off in these conditions? Not very smart. Let's see if I can find the appropriate little sound clip here in my library. I know I can. It's just like right here.
I'm not a smart man.
No, I'm not. Okay, so yes, hail does affect airplanes, just like your car. So, we've been out there in cars and been in a light hailstorm, and it hasn't done any damage to the skin of the car. But then again, we've also been or seen pictures of hail damage from baseball-sized hail. And when I say baseball-sized, I mean like what would the it'd be about maybe 2.5-inch, 3-inch diameter sphere size. That's the size of a baseball, I guess. I don't know how many centimeters that would be. Maybe 8 to 10 centimeters. I don't know. I don't know the metric system that well. So big, giant hailstones. In fact, one of my cars got hit by a hailstorm parked in the Acme Airlines parking lot at the Atlanta International Airport. And total damage to the car was over $3,000 to get it repaired. And I just had to pay my $1,000 deductible. It was a very expensive hailstorm for me. Anyway, that's off the path there. So I guess I should probably play this. I'm rambling. Okay, second question that Evan asked, are small private hang gliders controlled by ATC? So I looked it up. I wasn't really sure about that, Evan, so I looked up the Federal Aviation regulations, and of course you were asking about Europe, so I'm assuming that the rules are similar, but I'm not sure. But at least in the United States, let's see, FAR 103.1 or .1, this part prescribes rules governing the operation of ultralight vehicles in the United States. For the purpose of this part, an ultralight vehicle is a vehicle that is used or intended to be used for manned operation in the air by a single occupant, is used or intended to be used for recreation or sport purposes only, does not have any U.S. or foreign airworthiness certificate, and if unpowered weighs less than 155 pounds, or if it's powered weighs less than 254 pounds empty weight, excluding floats and safety devices, which are intended for deployment in a potentially catastrophic situation. It can't have a fuel capacity exceeding 5 U.S. gallons, and it is not capable of more than 55 knots calibrated airspeed at full power in level flight, and has a power-off stall speed which does not exceed 24 knots calibrated airspeed. Okay, so that's what is defining what an ultralight vehicle is. And as far as operating in a congested area, no person may operate an ultralight vehicle over any congested area of a city, town, or settlement, or over any open-air assembly of persons. And they may not operate an ultralight vehicle within Class A, Class B, Class C, or Class D airspace, or within the lateral boundaries of the surface area of Class E airspace designated for an airport unless that person has prior authorization. So basically, no. They are not controlled by ATC. They're basically out there away from all the controlled traffic. Uncontrolled airspace, basically, is where they are allowed to operate. So I hope that answers your question about hang gliders. Eric, another E name, sent me this a while back. In New Delhi, India, the falling rupee has claimed a new victim, the male cabin crew. Low-cost carrier Go Air has decided to recruit only air hostesses from now on instead of the heavier male flight pursers. The idea is to lighten the aircraft to reduce fuel burn because of increased operating costs. Right now, Go Air has 330 cabin crew members, 40% of whom are male. Every additional kilogram on board costs 3 rupees per flight hour, with an air hostess weighing about 15 to 20 kilograms less than a male. So basically, female weighing 15 to 20 kilograms less than a male. They expect to save about... Now, I don't understand this. I don't understand the system here. Rupees 2.5 crore, C-R-O-R-E, to 3 rupees crore annually. So I'm assuming that's like in a very high multiple of rupees, maybe in the millions or something. I don't know. It's supposed to save them a lot of money. That's basically what they're trying to say here. So, interesting information about an airline trying to save money by trying to hire people that don't weigh so much, because weight equals extra fuel burn, apparently. Okay. Thank you, Eric, for that little tidbit. And I should go back here. Oops. There we go. And play this. All right. Hello, Captain Jeff. Listened to Airline Pilot Guy number 73 and loved it. Thank you. This is also from the Airline Pilot Guy website. Currently, I'm looking for schools in the USA. I am leaning towards Embry-Riddle, but I want to fly for British Airways. Any advice? Thank you. Cheers. Didn't put down here who was asking this question, but you know who it was listening. And so I did a little bit of research, not very in-depth, but apparently British Airways had a program, like a cadet program, but I don't think it's in it's in use right now. I think the last class graduated sometime in 2012, last year. So I'm not sure if that's a route to get to British Airways. Perhaps one of my listeners out there will have a good answer for you. Embry-Riddle is a great school. In fact, the gentleman who was talking about the Airbus training philosophy at his major U.S. airline is a graduate of Embry-Riddle. And and I asked him about that, and he said it's still pretty expensive for a 4-year degree plus all your training to get all your ratings, private, commercial, multi-engine instrument, CFI, CFII, including a 4-year degree in aviation management or some other discipline, is approximately $200,000. And it could be actually more than that. And so it's expensive. But Embry-Riddle is one of those schools that is looked upon quite highly. Another good school, North Dakota, University of North Dakota, or North Dakota State. One of those North Dakota schools. Auburn University, sadly, that's where I went to school, apparently is losing their professional flight option, the actual flying portion of their aviation management program. And they thought they may actually be losing the entire program completely, but apparently they're going to keep it for the time being. And again, as I said, it's not the program that it used to be with all the professional flying options involved in that. But a lot of good schools out there, a lot of good state universities, a lot of good private universities, and not sure how that would work as far as coming over here to get your training and your degree and then going back over to the UK and getting on with British Airways. So maybe somebody out there, as I said, might have a good answer for you. So thanks for your question anyway. Let's see. We talked about earlier, somebody had asked about 2 engine failures. And since then, I've heard from many who have said, well, Captain Jeff, you may not have practiced dual engine failure or complete engine loss in your airplane, but I have, and so many of you have, and some of the curriculums of various airlines actually do have this as part of their training regime. Oliver writes, "It's funny you mentioned that because as a company we do and have practiced this failure. We did it twice on our command course onto the Airbus and then again recently 6 months ago. Both engine dual failure, fuel remaining and no fuel remaining. This was driven by the Transat situation that you have previously mentioned. It's obviously a complex drill and really tests cockpit resource management, CRM. Jeff, as an aside, you mentioned how with your seniority you choose your roster somewhat. So do you base your sector selection on pay, or do you just base it on FTL? I don't know what FTL means. Ours is based on FTL, but we end up flying roughly 20 sectors per rostered week, 5 days, approximately 1.5 hours is the average sector link. And so Oliver and I had a exchange, and I kind of went into a little bit more depth about how our schedules work, and I sent him an example of my monthly schedule, and he sent me an example of his. And apparently, at least with Acme here in the U.S., we have a lot more flexibility in how we construct our schedules than Oliver has with his airline. But I basically said that there are many in my seniority range that bid trips specifically on the maximum amount of flight pay that they can get. I tend to be a little bit more picky than that. I don't like really flying all darn day long and just getting completely worn out because, heck, I wouldn't have any time to do a podcast, right? I try to find trips that are, have as few legs as possible per day, not flying a heck of a lot. I'm not too concerned about the amount of pay that I get for each trip. If I need more pay, then I'll just fly another trip. That's just the way I roll, So thanks for your question, Oliver. Nick writes, I have some questions. At any airports throughout the world, how does an airport determine which runways would be departures and or arrivals? Number 2, since deregulation in the late 70s, fewer and fewer airlines have been around, causing mergers, but nowadays, with just a handful of the major airlines left, do you think that in the future there will be only one brand flying? Thanks for all the fun on your podcast. Keep climbing up. Nick Carson from Georgia. Okay, how does an airport determine which runways would be used for departures and arrivals? Well, it's basically based on wind. When they build an airport and they decide what direction to build the runways, they look at meteorological data to see what the prevalent wind is, and they'll usually build the runways lined up with that prevalent wind because the airplanes want to take off and land into the wind, not with the wind, because air flowing over the wings is what it's all about. And so if the prevalent wind is coming from the northwest to the southeast, then the runway is going to be runway 3113 or something close to that. There are places in the world where prevalent winds are from this direction and, oh, by the way, this other direction as well. And so you have a situation such as Chicago O'Hare, where you have runways that are just about pointed in every direction up there. Let's see, they have runway 422, left and right. They have, let's see, what else do they have? They have an east-west runways, about 3 of those. They have some runways that are going from the northwest to the southeast. They have them in many, many directions up there. So apparently their prevalent wind flow is all over the place. Atlanta, evidently the prevalent airflow or wind flow is either coming from the west or coming from the east. Hence, all the runways are oriented in an east-west direction. And they're all parallel, which gives a lot of efficiencies. In fact, Atlanta has the highest landing and departure rate of any airport in the world because of this particular layout. So the way they decide to build direct air runways and their orientation is based on historical wind data. And then when the runways are already built, when air traffic control decides that we're going to be using runway 27 left and 27 right for takeoffs and landings, it's because the wind is coming from the west. So when the wind shifts around to the other direction and you start having a tailwind component, then they make the decision to turn the airport around. They switch the operation of the landings and takeoffs, arrivals and departures to align with the wind. So that's how that is all determined. So I'm assuming that's what you meant by your question. And the second part of your question, since deregulation in the 70s, fewer and fewer airlines are going to be around for mergers, and we're seeing a lot of those lately. And do I think it's going to be eventually just one brand? No. We live in the United States. It's a capitalistic economy, and that is based on competition. And if you only have one airline, you're not going to have any competition, and that ain't going to ever happen here in this country, at least. So, no, I don't ever see that happening. Will we see fewer and fewer airlines competing against each other? Probably. Back in 1978, the deregulation, what was it called? The deregulation regulation? No, that's not it. Anyway, when deregulation occurred and was passed as law back in the late 70s, they thought that what is happening today with all these big mergers of big airlines was going to happen right away. But it's only taken, 30 years or so for this to happen? But we're seeing a lot of that recently. So I probably envision, 4 or 5 major airlines competing against each other. I don't think it's going to get too much more consolidated than we have right now. I could be wrong, but that's my opinion. Okay. And I can't really seem to please everybody out there. I mean, several of you asked me to play these little musical interludes to kind of give you a break and kind of have a nice place to put the podcast on pause and to resume at a later time. And then I've had others who have said, cut out all those stupid musical interludes there, Jeff, because it's just making your show even longer than it needs to be. And you don't need them. But the person that had just said that to me recently, if you watch the video, you'll see that when I'm playing the music, I'm taking a sip of my beer. So I do need them. Gives me a break. All right. From Mike, it's a good thing we're not meeting on Monday because something tells me you're going to be spending a lot of time analyzing and talking about the Asiana crash. Obviously, Mike, you sent this email to me a long time ago. Sorry it's taken me this long to get to it. Anyway, his question, he says, just how critical is it on a clear day that an airline pilot has a glide slope and or PAPI, a precision approach path indicator? Obviously, for me, the answer is not at all. And I'm thinking that your answer might be the same, but then you're flying a much, much larger aircraft. Ciao, Mike. Okay, how critical is it that we have some kind of glide path guidance? I wouldn't say it's critical, but I would say it is helpful. Because we, even those of us who do this for a living, succumb at times to illusions based on the slope of a runway, the length of the runway, visibility at the airport, etc. And it is always very, very helpful, and I think that it really adds to safety when we have some kind of an indication, whether it be an electronic glide slope, a PAPI, a VASI, a slope. Let me try that again. Visual Approach Slope Indicator, VASI, or the PAPI, as I mentioned, the Precision Approach Path Indicator, or something out there to kind of give us an idea that we're, yes, on the proper path or the glide slope to the runway. Why is that important? Well, if you're too steep coming in, you might have too much energy that you have to dissipate when you flare and touch down and brake. Not brake like broken, but stop. If you're coming in too shallow, there's a chance that you could hit something on the ground before you hit the runway, or your energy level may be too low for the situation. That kind of has its own problems as well. So the ideal glide slope is usually somewhere between about 2.5, 3 degrees. And it is important for us to have some kind of a indication of what the proper approach path, vertical path is, so that we make a nice, safe landing on speed in the touchdown zone. So that would be my answer. Now, as professional airline pilots, should we, and for that matter, any kind of pilot out there, should we all, as pilots, be able to look at a runway and, using whatever tools and resources we have, determine a proper visual glide path? Yes, we should be able to do that. How do we do that? Practicing it. And there are times when we end up going into places that the PAPI or VASIs are out and we don't have an electronic glide path, and then we do something like use distance measuring equipment, and we know roughly where the end of the runway is, where we're going to touch down, and we can see how far out we are, and we know how high we are above the ground because we all have altimeters, and then we just do a 3-to-1 calculation. You've heard me say it before. 300 feet, we should be, at 1 mile out. I'm sorry, I'm being distracted. I have TBS on in the background, and it's the Family Guy podcast, and one of the characters on the show is an airline pilot, and they're doing something in the airplane right now. So anyway, at 900 feet, we should be approximately a mile out. That's 3-to-1. 600 feet above the ground, we should be, did I do that right? 3-to-1. Yeah. At 1 mile, we should be 300 feet above the ground. 2 miles, we should be 600 feet above the ground. And 3 miles, we should be 900 feet above the ground. There we go. So there are ways that we can determine our visual approach slope if we don't have any other indicators to help us. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm talking, I should probably really edit this out because I've just made myself sound like a fool. So perhaps I've had too many beers or something, but when I'm flying an airplane, I know how to do that. Okay, so thanks for your feedback, Mike, and keep listening and keep sending it in. Let's move on, shall we? To Seth. I was recently at our company's hangar at the airport here in Grand Rapids and was watching an MD-80 whatever taxiing out to take off, and I noticed he was using only one engine to do the taxiing. It seems that after he got clearance to take off, he started the other engine while he rolled out onto the runway. Is this something you do with Acme? Do you know of other pilots doing this too, or is this the norm for multi-engines? Thanks for providing such a great podcast. Okay, well, the critical word you used here is that it seems that after he got clearance to take off, that's when he started up the other engine. I can't say exactly what happened in this instance that you witnessed, but let me tell you what the general guidance is. at Acme and a lot of the airlines, we try to employ single-engine taxiing procedures because having only one engine operating while you're taxiing saves fuel. If you have both engines operating, then obviously you're burning twice as much fuel as you need to, or approximately twice as much. But you need to have both engines running on a 2-engine airplane, obviously, before you take off. And you really want to have some kind of a warm-up period. At Acme, at least the airplane that I'm flying, we have to have a minimum of 2 minutes from the time the engine is started to the time that we apply takeoff power for takeoff. And we try to time it so that it works out to be exactly 2 minutes. Sometimes we hit it, sometimes we don't. If we're going to err, we need to err on the side of having a little bit more than 2 minutes of a warm-up, because it's definitely a no-no to start applying takeoff thrust to an engine that has not had that ample time to warm up, because you could end up having some kind of a failure. There are times when more than 2 minutes are required. If the engine has been not operating for 3 hours or more, basically we need to have, we would like to have 5 minutes of warm-up time. 2 minutes are required, but again, our guidance tells us to have something closer to 5 minutes before you apply takeoff thrust. And then there are times when the weather is cold that it is an absolute requirement that we have a certain amount of time. Again, on the airplane that I fly, it's 5 minutes. So when the temperatures are very, very cold in the wintertime, we need to have that 5 minutes on each engine before we apply takeoff thrust. So if this person was actually starting an engine while they were taking the runway for takeoff, I'd say that they didn't have the 2 minutes, so I don't know. Again, I wasn't there. Perhaps it seemed one way, but in reality it wasn't. But in general, most airlines that I know of these days will try to do the operations on the ground with only one engine operating to save fuel, both going out and coming back in after a good warm-up period before takeoff and a cool-down period before engine shutdown. So, hope that answers your question, Seth, and thanks for sending it in. Turning my microphone on, I find, makes it easier for you to hear me. Okay, here we go. Somebody sent me, again, I didn't write down who this was. Oh, yes, I did. Pasadena Brian. Thank you, Pasadena Brian. He says, this might be a bit off topic, but it is a current discussion. Could rear-facing aircraft seats be safer? And then he has a link to an article that reads, doctors treating survivors of last weekend's plane crash. Obviously, it was more than last weekend. It was about a month ago, in which 2 people died and 181, actually 3 people were killed, and 181 hurt, have urged manufacturers to consider introducing 3-point seatbelts after a number of passengers suffered spinal injuries. Other commentators have suggested that aircraft designers consider installing rear-facing seats as they provide better support for the back, neck, and head in the event of a sudden deceleration. David Learmount, operations and safety editor at the aviation news website flightglobal.com and a former RAF pilot and flight instructor, agreed that in the event of a crash, rear-facing seats were safer, but he warned that airlines would be unlikely to support such changes due to costs and customer preference. So, Pasadena Brian continues, personally, I've flown on several United flights that have rear-facing seats I didn't know United had airplanes with rear-facing seats. I find the experience to be awkwardly uncomfortable, but that's probably because I'm used to facing forward. I wonder how many of the flying public would be willing to sit facing rear and be safer versus being comfortable. The article talks about how military aircraft are outfitted with rear-facing seats. Yeah, the 141, when we flew that in the Air Force, when we had pallets that had passenger-style seats on them, were facing the back. And the C-5 Galaxy had rear-facing seats in the passenger seating section of the airplane. He said, I've also flown an aircraft with airbags in the seatbelt. I wonder in the Asiana flight if it had these airbag seatbelts, if they had them, and how they performed. If not, I wonder how the passengers would have fared with airbags or 3-point seatbelts. Thanks, Brian. I'd say that if they did have these airbags and or 3-point seatbelts, that they would have fared better, because a lot of injuries were caused by vertical forces, back injuries, neck injuries. We, as pilots, use 3-point seatbelts, shoulder harnesses and a crotch belt. I think that it would be a good thing. But, we're having a hard enough time getting people to use the darn lap belt, just one belt around their waist. I mean, just, walk around in the inside of a cabin, even though I say all the time, hey, the seatbelt light's off. That means you can get up if you need to, but if you don't need to get up, please stay in your seat with your seatbelt fastened in case we encounter any unexpected turbulent air. And you walk through the cabin, and guess what? A very large number of people sitting in their seats do not have their seatbelts fastened. And that's just plain stupid. You need to have the seatbelt on. So, we have a hard enough time with just the lap belts. Can you imagine having, 3-point or 4-point or 5-point harnesses in passenger seats? I don't know. It would be safer, but I'm just not sure how we're going to get people to actually wear the darn things. Rear-facing seats. Honestly, I think that if all the airlines decided we're going to turn all the seats around on all the airplanes, I think your average passenger probably wouldn't care that much. They get on the airplane, find a place for their bag, sit down. They don't care if the seat is facing forward or backward. I ride on trains a lot to and from work, and I sit a lot in seats that are facing the rear of the train, and sometimes facing forward. Doesn't bother me either way. I don't care. So I'm not so sure that this argument that airlines use that passengers would hate this is actually a valid one. I think it's just easier, status quo. Just leave it the way it is. But again, that's just my opinion. May not be yours, but it's my opinion. Okay, thanks Pasadena Brian again for your feedback, as always. Now, this is an interesting one. I got this from Dominic, and he says, I've always had the airplane bug, as my father says, and I've always known the sky as my home. You see, I stutter, but I have it mostly under control, and I really would like to know if this would be a problem in the Air Force or the airlines. Thanks for reading. I love your podcasts. Clear skies and great visibility. Dominic. And he is from Ramona, California. He's 15 years old. He is a student pilot, and his home base is Kilo Romeo November Mike, KRNM. Now, when he sent this to me, I'm thinking to myself, I seem to remember listening to a podcast by Danielle Rossi, and he's in Canada, and he has a podcast entitled Stuttering is Cool. And I remember listening to one of his episodes where he interviewed a pilot, an airline pilot. And let's take a listen to a little bit of his podcast.
I have Jay on Skype, who is going to be talking to me today about what it's like to be an airline pilot who stutters. Welcome to Stuttering is Cool.
Thanks a lot, Danny. Glad to be here.
So, what is it like to be a pilot, an airline pilot?
I don't necessarily know that it is any different. The only thing is that I become very good at substituting terms. And you know that there's a lot of lingo, especially talking to the ATC guys or doing checklists, and sometimes that can be challenging on occasion, but like with everything, you kind of learn tips and you learn tricks and you get through it.
And on my show, I tend to, not really talk down, but I guess discourage. I'm not sure if discourage sounds like a negative term, but
Okay, a little tiny taste of that episode. I'll have the full episode URL in the show notes. Again, the podcast, a very interesting podcast, Stuttering is Cool, produced and hosted by Danielle Rossi. And Dominic, I hope that you listen to this and are encouraged by what you hear. And a follow-up to this was this podcast, I think, was produced a couple of years ago, and I think there is some follow-on. I think the guy that was interviewed here is with a different airline and apparently has not hindered at all in any way his ability to advance in flying. And I don't think it would be a problem either in the military flying or the airline. So I'd say go for it, Dominic. Stuttering is not going to hold you back. So enjoy, and anybody who is interested, check out Stuttering is Cool, an excellent podcast by Danielle Rossi. And thank you, Danielle, for allowing me to play a little clip of that in my podcast. And let me jump over to several of you sent me feedback regarding, in I think it was last episode, a listener asked about flying with a disability, specifically unable to use full use of his legs to actuate the rudder pedal surfaces. And I mentioned that there was a pilot down in Australia who was flying around Australia, and he has a license, and it wasn't hindering him at all. And then I was doing some looking at some of the news articles at AirVenture in Oshkosh last week, and they had an article about this program called Able Flight, and noticed that they had several graduates, and they were all in wheelchairs. And I thought, how coincident, or coincidental. And then several of you sent me feedback saying that Able Flight is a program, blah, blah, blah. So you get the gist here. So let me play some of that feedback for you.
Hey, Captain Jeff, it's PJ from Houston. Hey, I was just listening to episode 77. This is just a quick feedback for the gentleman, the disabled gentleman who's interested in flying. He should check out, there's an organization called Able Flight. They're basically for people just like himself, where they take people with disabilities and mobility issues and teach them how to fly in airplanes that do not require rudders to be used, or at least fleet-operated rudders to be used. For example, the Air Coupe is one that does not have rudder pedals. The rudders are interlinked with the ailerons, and then they use the Sky Arrow as well, which actually has a hand-operated rudder controls. So there are options for this gentleman. Check out, I think it's ableflight.org is the website. So best of luck to him and whoever he may be. And keep up the great work on the great show. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, PJ. As always, he always sends me great feedback. And also from Tiff in Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. She writes, "Hey, in your last episode, someone asked about being disabled and how that might affect being a pilot. The Able Flight organization helps people achieve this dream. Their website has a lot of info, and hopefully this helps the gentleman that asked." And again, she sends the URL, ableflight.org. "Thanks for the podcast. It makes work go by faster." You're welcome, Tiff. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sending me the feedback. So there we have it. My listeners come through for me again. The gentleman who is 54, 55 years old and who has a disability and who wants to learn how to fly, you got the green light, man. Go for it. All right. Cameras in the cockpits. Hi there, Captain Jeff. I hope all is well with you. I was out with my dog Samson, a 13-and-a-half-year-old golden retriever, but acts like a 2-year-old. Golden retrievers are great dogs. And as I watched another Air New Zealand A320 overhead, he lives over the final approach to runway 16 in Wellington, I started to think about aircraft accidents. We all know aircraft have cockpit voice recorders and data recorders. Well, almost all aircraft. All the new aircraft seem to have cameras, like the Boeing 777, the Airbuses, of external views of the aircraft for the pilots and passengers to view. My idea is, why don't or do they have video recorders like a CVR, but only video recorders from the outside cameras instead of just voice in the cockpit? It could be called a digital flight video recorder, a DFVR. It would loop around every 30 to 6 minutes, just like a CVR does, and made from the same stuff as cockpit voice recorders, so it would make it through a crash. I'm sure it would help in any aircraft accident. Any thoughts? Hope all is well with yourself and your family. Best wishes and kind regards, Tim. Thanks, Tim, from New Zealand. And technology has gotten to the point where, I'm using this little tiny Logitech C910 webcam. It's a high definition 1080p. Although I'm not, if you're watching this YouTube video, you're going to say, "Oh, this is not in 1080p." No, because 1080p is, or 1080i, 1080 something, full HD anyway, is it has they're big files, huge files. I can't do 1080 because I just don't have enough room on my hard drive. But I think what you're watching right now on YouTube is maybe a 720. But anyway, my point is, this thing is 3 inches wide by 1 inch tall, and it's just, it fits in my hand. It's a tiny little thing. Technology's gotten to the point where, we could easily have cameras mounted. Just go on YouTube, do a search for, cockpit, and you'll see tons and tons of videos out there where people have mounted GoPro cameras and all kinds of high definition video cameras inside the cockpit. There's no reason that we can't have something like that and create some kind of device that would store the video in memory and would survive a crash. And would that help in accident investigation? Absolutely it would. But there's a fine line here. I, as an airline pilot, I'm not sure I like that intrusion of somebody always looking over my shoulder. Yeah, you could say, well, somebody is listening over your shoulder, as it is, Jeff. What's the problem with having video? And wouldn't it be worth it, sacrificing a little bit of your freedom and perhaps some of your rights to make it easier for the public and safety and all that kind of stuff to have that available. I see the argument. I really do. But, and it's hard for me really to come up with a rational defense against not having videos in the cockpit, other than it would be kind of a convenience, an intrusion for me personally. But thinking outside of just my little tiny universe and what affects me personally, I think that it would be a good thing. I really do. And I think it's going to happen. Even though many of us, like me, are going to fight it, I think it will eventually happen. So look forward to having that as one of the tools that investigators will have at their disposal in the future to help solve accidents, incidents, that kind of thing. Somebody else, I don't know if if I still have the feedback somewhere in my backlog of feedback, but somebody sent me some email feedback, I believe, that said it's a no-brainer. And basically this person is saying, look, again, we have this technology, this beautiful, this wonderful technology that's ever present. And why is it we can have an accident like the Asiana crash and not have perfect perspective, multiple angles, high-definition video of that crash? Why can't we have high-definition video from many, many angles at every single takeoff and landing at every airport? Yeah, it wouldn't cost that much money, would it? It wouldn't require, having a crash capable, crash survivable kind of enclosure or technology, because all it would require is mounting these cameras in various places around an airport, and then just, getting the signal from these things and going to a central location and, recording on some kind of a loop. So when we have a landing that goes awry and perhaps a nose wheel collapses, or if we have an airplane that hits a seawall, or if we have an airplane that goes getting off the end of the runway, if we should be able to have video, not just somebody who happens to be plane spotting or happens to be a passenger taking a picture of an airplane because, Uncle Louie is on the airplane and he's taking off and we're never going to see him again. It would be great to have, purpose built and purpose oriented cameras at every airport, because the technology is so cheap now that really I can't think of any argument against it. Can you? Give me your thoughts. What do you think? So good point, all of you people who are saying that video is the thing, dude. We should have it. And for the most part, I agree with you. Hi, Jeff. I'm an Italian guy who has always wanted to be a pilot. Unfortunately, I can't be a military pilot because of the restrictive eyesight limits. My only way to realize my dream is the civilian career, but the problem is that I haven't enough money to take all the licenses required. What was your path to become a pilot in the USA? Sorry for my English. Again, another example of somebody apologizing for their English skills, and you did a great job. So, and again, I forgot to put your name on here. So whoever you are, Italian guy, you're doing fine. Your English is fine. He says, by the way, I really like your podcast. Keep posting them. Ciao. This may have been from one of my YouTube videos and the comments there. Anyway, okay, short of doing what Thomas Salme did, and by the way, most of the feedback that I've received regarding that interview that I did last episode with the Swedish guy that flew for 13 years without a license has been positive. I have received a little bit of pushback, negative feedback, but again, most of the feedback I've received is positive. And so you could do what he did, but it's not recommended, and even he would not recommend getting into this job field without having legitimate licenses and documentation. So the military route works well if you don't have restrictions for eyesight and that kind of thing. Civilian route can be expensive, but I'll bet there are ways to do it without expending a lot of money. And many of the folks that are in this career field now have gotten there without spending a lot of money. So maybe somebody listening right now who is an airline pilot and who went through the civilian route can send me some feedback and give this gentleman some ideas about how to do it without having a lot of money to begin with. You asked how I did it, and as many of you know who are listeners, who have listened for quite some time, know that I basically got my training in the military after I graduated from a 4-year degree program at Auburn University. 2 weeks after graduation, I was being inducted into the United States Air Force. I went through officer training school first, because in the military, you're an officer first and a pilot second. And so after I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Air Force, shortly after that, I was off to undergraduate pilot training, and that lasts, at least at that time, about a year. I think it still does. And then after that, I received my wings, and then after that, I was committed to serve another 6 years. Now, unfortunately, in the United States, the commitment is like 10 years after you get your wings. But regardless, the military route is a great way to go because, I wasn't paying for my flight training. The government was, and they were actually paying me. And it was a wonderful experience. I was reluctant at first to get into the military. I was trying to get into the flying field without going into the military. I did not come from a military family. My idea of what it was going to be like in the military was based on what I saw on movies and television programs, which, by the way, were not really accurate. I thought I was going to be living in a barracks situation and eating in the mess hall for my entire time as a military officer. And what I realized after I got in was that, it was much more like a regular job. But there are times when you may be in a war situation where people are shooting at you. So in that way, it's a little bit different than most civilian jobs. And the quality of the flying that I got to experience, the quality of the training, the quality of the people is just beyond compare. It's just top notch. And now I look back at my time in the military and I think, wow, that was priceless. I'm glad that I ended up doing that. That was a great thing. So I highly recommend doing that. Now, if you're listening right now and you're thinking, I'd really like to get in the airlines, I don't want to commit to over 11, 12 years before I can get out and become an airline pilot. Seriously look into the Air National Guard and the Air Force or other military reserve units where you can get that quality training in the military, but your commitment's not the same. You don't have to commit to a long active duty commitment before you can get out and fly for a civilian airline. You can actually kind of serve in your reserve and guard unit concurrently or simultaneously with your job in an airline. So it's a great way. It's a great way to have your cake and eat it too. So you should definitely look into doing that if you have whatever is required to get into the military, and then try to affiliate with an Air National Guard or Air Force Reserve unit or something like that. Highly recommended. I wish that I'd known about that before I got into the Air Force as an active duty officer. I didn't learn about it until I was in officer training school, And I went, oh, that's what I'd like to do. And my good friend Ken said, it's too late for that. You have to do that before you are inducted into the Air Force. Oh, so definitely look into that. Now, the gentleman asking about the civilian, again, I'm going to need some help from my listeners. Help me out here, answer this guy's question. So thanks for listening and your kind comments, sir. This one is from Roberto Harrington. He said, greetings from Panama. You have quite an international following. You can add Panama to your listener countries list. Okay. I am not in the aviation industry, but really enjoy all things aviation and especially airline related. Your podcast is a nice way to be kept in the loop, and your hard work is much appreciated. Thanks. A quick question regarding jump seat etiquette. In episode 73, and he says, by the way, iTunes is missing 74 and 75. I'm not sure why iTunes is missing those episodes for you, Roberto. I would recommend in your iTunes unsubscribing from my podcast and then resubscribing. See if those missing episodes show up. And, oh, you know what? It could be that those are the ones that I ended up uploading to, I bet that's what it is. I uploaded a couple to a different media server. iTunes, by the way, iTunes does not store my podcasts. It's just a directory that kind of points to where to find those media files. And I was running out of room at Libsyn, my normal media server, and instead of spending more money for more storage, I decided I'll just put them on the Internet Archive, and that's free. And it works for 99% of you. But if you're in a country that for whatever reason has a firewall or doesn't allow data or files to be downloaded from the Internet Archive, I know that there was a listener in China that was having the same problem. I'm not sure if it was 74 and 75, but I'm suspecting now that may be what it is. So I guess you're just going to have to miss 74 and 75, unless there's a way for me to get them back on my regular media server. Okay, enough shop talk. But that's probably what it is, and I apologize, Roberto. And by the way, 74 and 75, those shows weren't any good anyway. You commented about your recent A320 jump seat experience. While jump seating, especially in another airline or in equipment very different to the one you typically fly, would it be rude or simply annoying to ask the crew a whole bunch of questions or generally show interest in what they were doing? Or are you simply expected to sit there and basically remain quiet the whole time and only engage in general non-aviation chatter during cruising, etc.? Would questions be limited to the actual flight experience, or would exchange views on how Acme does one thing and their airline another in terms of more mundane things like pay, vacations, perks, union matters, administrative stuff, etc.? Keep up the excellent job. Thank you. Regards, Roberto. So thank you, Roberto, for being my listener in Panama. And to answer your question, there's really no definitive answer. You really kind of have to judge the folks you're flying with, maybe ask a couple sample questions to see what their response is going to be. I'd say in general, the folks that end up flying on my jump seat when I'm operating the flight, in general, they kind of keep to themselves. They don't really say a lot. They kind of wait to get a cue from me or my first officer as far as initiating a conversation with them. And then if we're, and I'll do that a lot, I'll say, yeah, how are things going with, American or US Air or whatever airline they're with? And then that kind of opens the door to questions and commentary and conversation regarding their airline, their job, their union situation, whatever. I don't have a lot of experience as being the person riding on the jump seat. I've only done it a few times, mostly with, all with Acme, I think, Airlines. And so, again, I try to gauge what the level of conversation is going to be. Sometimes I get a sense that the pilots that I'm flying with really would rather not talk at all. There are times when they initiate conversations and I feel more comfortable about asking my own questions, that kind of thing. So I guess the answer, again, not definitive. It's probably one of those things where it just depends. And I know that's probably not the answer that you were hoping for, but that's all I can say. So again, Roberto, thanks for your kind comments regarding my podcast. Thanks for listening. And please don't hesitate to send more feedback in the future. Speaking of feedback, this is from Chumley. Now, Chumley used my SpeakPipe. Now, I don't really know if this person is really named Chumley and if this is for real or not, but it is funny. The problem is he used SpeakPipe and using his computer and the built-in microphone or whatever microphone was connected, and the audio was very, very overmodulated. I tried to fix it with my audio editing program, and I was successful in a small amount to kind of make it more listenable, but it's still very difficult to hear. But I'm going to play it anyway because I laughed my head off when I heard. Now, I'm hoping that this was actually purposely supposed to be funny because it was funny to me. So let's listen to Chumley's audio feedback.
Hello, Captain Jeff. This is Chumley. Big fan. I'm from Orangedale, Boscastle, Comerford, Dunster, Morrigate, Ramsgate, Sir James Park, which is just south of Torcross. Aye. I'm sitting here with me pals in the Salvador Doppelbock. That's quite the brew. Just wanted to tell you, actually, I love your podcast here over on the other side of the pond. What's that, Matt? No! I'm on with Captain Jeff. Excuse me, Captain Jeff, my mom's calling. What's that? No, I haven't been on there for 5 hours. No, he only does it for about 2 hours. I know it seems like it's been for days, but it's only been for 2 hours. Sorry, Jeff, she's a very tough woman to put up with. She wouldn't allow me to fly or nothing. Anyway, it takes a lot onto me, Jeff. Once again, No, I'm not drinking beer, Mom. I'm having soda. Not really. I've kind of snuck my pouring myself with all the Doppelbock box. Anyway, Jeff, got to run. Ha! Blimey, it's been quite a pleasure. Hope you play me on your podcast. And good flying to ya. And hope you get a real smooth ride. Aye. This is Chumley out.
Okay. Now, I don't know. What do you think? Was that really, was that for real? Chumley, come on, tell me. Were you just putting me on there, or am I offending you? This really is you. And whatever the answer is, whether this is something that you came up with to be funny, or if this is really you, I love it. Either way, that's awesome. I have no idea where you said you were from. It was about 10 words long, maybe somewhere in Scotland. I don't know. So anyway, very, very entertaining feedback, sir. Thank you very much for sending it in. How are we doing here? We're not quite at 2 hours, Chumley. I know, it only seems like 5 hours. Let's see. And by the way, I don't have any distracting television in the background. Okay. Oh, this is a good one. I'll probably spend at least 20 minutes on this one. Hopefully not. This is from Dave in Toronto. He sends this feedback. He says, winglets, what do they do? I have seen winglets on most Boeing aircraft except the 767. Have you seen them on this aircraft? Yes, I have, actually. At Acme, we have several of our 767s have the blended winglets and actually make that airplane look beautiful. If not, any ideas, why not? Once we are on the subject, how about coming up with a better name? After you explain what they do, then we should start a contest for a better name. Something much tougher sounding. And the second question, what airports in the USA have specific time-sensitive landing slots? Quite often, when flying from Toronto to Chicago, they will hold the plane on the ground in Toronto until the designated wheels up time. What other airports operate with this type of schedule for incoming flights? Dave from Toronto. Thanks, Dave, for your question, and great question, by the way. And so let me get over here to my Chrome browser, and I will pull up a couple of the references that I found online. But again, if you're not familiar with what Dave is talking about, winglets, or what is that noise? I'm hearing clunking noises. I don't think I'm doing it. Winglets are those things at the end of the wing tips, that what is going on in my room? Hope it's not rats. By the way, this hotel we're staying in Orlando, the Rosen Shingle Creek, is not one of our normal hotels. We normally stay at the Rosen Plaza Hotel, which is kind of on an International Drive, kind of closer to a lot of the restaurants and that kind of thing. This property, at which I've never stayed, is more of in a resort setting, not too far from the plaza, but this is, again, called the Shingle Creek Rosen Hotel. And it's a beautiful place, but again, it's isolated. And a beautiful room, beautiful furniture. Everything's very, very nice here. Again, a little bit isolated. So you're kind of forced to use the facilities here. And the reason why we're here, and it's not a permanent thing, is because I guess they ran out of hotel rooms, even though Acme books a certain number of hotel rooms. I guess there's some flexibility there if the property decides that they need the rooms for some other event, that as long as we are given appropriate accommodations and the transportation is taken care of, and at least they're as good or better than what we were expecting, then it's okay to do. So I'm not complaining. It's a very nice place, but again, I think there was some kind of a yo-yo convention or something going on at the other property, and they decided that air crews for today and tomorrow will be spending their layover here instead. Okay, wingtip devices. So what are they for? Those are those, like, it looks like the pilot got too close to a building or something and bent the wingtip up. And in most cases, that's not true. They are purposely designed to kind of come from the end of the wing and bend upward. And there are several different types, and I'll explain those different types shortly. But the reason why fixed-wing aircraft have these wingtip devices is for reducing drag by recovering some of the energy from the wingtip vortices. You'll remember that a wingtip vortices is vortex is caused by the way a wing creates lift, and that's what, of course, makes an airplane fly, is that the pressure on the underside of the wing is higher than the pressure on the top side or top part of the wing. And the difference in pressure is a force that lifts the wings up. So when the airflow and pressure from the bottom, the higher pressure, kind of meets the pressure or lower pressure on the top, especially as the lift and the forces kind of radiate outward away from the fuselage and toward the wingtips, where these two meet, they end up generating these vortices or horizontal tornadoes. And those are not a great thing, especially if you're in an airplane behind. You get in somebody's wingtip vortices, and it's like hitting somebody's wave or wake. Like, have you ever been in a boat or seen a boat going down the river or the whatever body of water, and you see the waves coming from the back of the boat and kind of spreading outward? That's sort of like what is happening at the end of each wing. And so these vortices actually cause drag. And so if you put something to help the creation of these vortices be dampened or lessened, you end up decreasing the drag on the wing, and less drag means less fuel burned. So the reason why the airplanes have wingtip or winglets or whatever you want to call them is to increase fuel efficiency. So that's the reason why we have these things. By the way, as a side note, at Acme back in the 90s, when basically no airliner out there had winglets, Acme ended up contracting with a third-party aftermarket company to install winglets on our 727s, 3 of our 727s. And I flew all 3 of them at various times, and it was really, really cool to fly into a place because we were like the center of attention. Everybody said, "Hey, Acme, what do you think of those things?" And everybody was very, very interested to hear what kind of, if it was something that you actually noticed in flying the airplane. It was a slight performance improvement, a little bit better climb performance. Really didn't notice anything at cruise, or, again, as I said, the real effect of these things was an increase or a decrease in the specific fuel consumption. And it's not something you really feel. It's just something that you notice over time by burning less fuel. By the way, Acme basically had even though they had some great success with their use on the airplanes and getting better fuel mileage, they ended up taking them off the airplane because Boeing said to Acme, "Oh, by the way, we didn't install those. They're not part of the original design of the aircraft, and basically they void your warranty. So either take them off or leave them on, and we don't warrant your airframe anymore." And so Acme thought, probably a better idea to take them off and go ahead and have not so great fuel economy. So that's what they did. Now, fast forward a couple decades later, and every darn airplane, it seems, has these things. For good reason, because they do enhance performance and fuel consumption. Okay, so you've seen various implementations of this technology on Airbus aircraft like the 3 series, the 319, the 320, 321, have something they call wing fences. They're smaller and they extend above and below the wingtip surface, again, in an effort to smooth the vortices off the end of the wing. Many of the Boeing airplanes, as mentioned in the feedback, have the typical looking winglets, either something that looks like they were just slammed on the end of the wingtip, like the 747-400, or something beautiful like the 767 and 757 blended winglets, so they kind of curve in a nice smooth curve upward. Really pretty, really enhance the look of the airplane, in my opinion. So you have different looking technologies, but they all are basically doing the same thing. Now, some of the newer airplanes, like the Boeing 787 Dreamliner and the 747-8, the newest model of the 747, they don't have the winglets at all. They basically have a wingtip or wing extension. So the wings are longer and they kind of sweep backwards, but they don't really go upward that much. Again, they enhance the fuel economy and performance of the wing. And the final thing that Dave said, hey, why do we have this stupid name winglet? Let's think of something more manly, something more macho. And so, hey, how about this? Maybe you've seen some of the new models of the 300 series, the 320, 321. They are starting to use a wingtip or winglet on there that looks like a lot of the Boeings, but they don't call them winglets. They call them Sharklets. Yeah, shark, manly. You know, that's a little bit different than winglet. Although they need to get rid of the let part of it. Like shark fin. That's better, right? I got a shark fin on my wing, not a sharklet. Oh, how about this? The 737 MAX has a new winglet design. And so you have a winglet that's going upward, but also another one that's going downward at an angle. And they call theirs the Scimitar. Kind of like that curved fighting sword used in various countries in the East. The Scimitar. That's a manly sounding thing, huh? So hey, Dave, they are already coming up with manly names for these things. So there you go. Hope that makes you happy. Now, yeah, much tougher sounding. What airports in the USA have specific time-sensitive landing slots? Okay, many of you have experienced this, where you're about to take off from point A to point B, a lot of times going into a major hub for an airline. As Dave mentioned, going to from Toronto to Chicago, or you may be going from Memphis to Atlanta, or you may be somewhere from point A to, say, Dallas-Fort Worth. The pilot comes on and says, we have a ground delay program in effect. A ground delay program is a program that the Federal Aviation Administration administers. They have something called flow control. What is it called? TMU. Traffic Management. Unit. Traffic Management Unit, I think. It's a division within the air traffic control of the FAA that monitors the flow of traffic. And the specific airport might have some kind of a bottleneck due to a runway closure, for instance, or perhaps the ceilings and visibilities at an airport have been reduced, and so the arrival rate and departure rate have decreased from their optimum rate, and so they can't handle as many airplanes coming in as they normally can. And so instead of launching everybody at their normal times and then having everybody up in the air in holding patterns, they try to regulate the flow going to that airport using either a ground delay program or even a ground stop. And let's say Atlanta's getting hammered by thunderstorms and the airport is closed. Well, that instance would probably use a ground stop program. But if things are just backed up because of weather in the area, the airport's not completely shut down, but the arrival rates have decreased, then they may institute a ground delay program. So that means you have to wait. Air traffic control says basically, this is the time that we're going to allow you to take off. There are other times when we are at an airport and let's say, again, for our example, Memphis to Atlanta, and the weather is beautiful in Memphis and the weather is beautiful in Atlanta. But because of just the volume of traffic, they can't, or maybe even the highways in the sky that we use to get from point A to point B are so saturated with traffic, and the traffic that has been already in the air from, let's say, Los Angeles or Dallas, and have started from somewhere much further away, and they're already in those airways, which are crowded, and there's no space for folks trying to get from somewhere closer to the destination. We have to wait for that spot, that slot, to get ourselves into, and that would be en route flow control. So sometimes we don't even know this is going to happen until we are taxiing out, and then all of a sudden they say, well, we just called for your release time, and your release time is from 32 to 38 after the hour. And again, that has nothing to do with the airport itself. That has everything to do with the traffic in the air, and the highways in the air, and then just finding a space for you. So those are two different kind of delay programs. And how many airports have these things? Well, Dave, any of the big airports in the United States is subject to this kind of program. Now, if you ever want to check out the ground delay or ground stop programs in the United States, at least, you can go to www.faa.gov. No, wait, I'm sorry. Fly. Yeah, forget about the www. fly.faa.gov/OIS. And that will give you a chart, a table of any of the ground delay programs, ground stops. It'll show you in the wintertime, especially those airports that are have de-icing programs, how much of a delay to expect, arrival delays, departure delays, etc. You can click on links to show more information about the delay program in effect, and how long they think it's going to last. Some of the comments may say it only affects people within this radius of the destination airport. So people that are coming in from international flights or coast-to-coast flights may not be affected by the delay program, etc. A lot of good information there. Again, that's fly.faa.gov/OIS. I have it as a bookmark on my phone and computers, and I can pull up information about that. And in fact, a lot of times, if we're still on the ground and we're waiting for 15, 20 minutes or half an hour, and we're just sitting there on the ramp or in a holding area before we take off, I'll tell people that it's okay to use their electronic devices, and if they have the cellular data, they can fire up their machines, and I'll tell them go to fly.faa.gov/OIS, and you can see that I'm not lying to you, that you can see what the ground delay program is in effect at the time. So check that out. I'll have a link to that in the show notes if I remember. And so that's the answer. Most of the medium to large airports, especially the hubs, are subject to these kind of programs, Dave. Thanks for your feedback. And let's see, what else? I thought there was one more thing I was going to talk about here. Oh, one more piece of feedback. We're getting close to 2 hours, so I'll go ahead and probably make this the last bit of feedback. And this is from Mechanic Bob.
Hello, Captain Jeff. I'm Mechanic Bob. I'm calling you from California. I'm a private pilot for a hobby, and I'm an aircraft mechanic, A&P, for a living. I was calling you to leave you some feedback for episode 79, where you talked about air traffic control changing the way that they were communicating with pilots, where they would send messages, air traffic control instructions, through the FMS, and the pilots would respond through the FMS. I went to a conference recently on this, and I figured I could pass on the information that I learned, and if you would like to, feel free to play it on your podcasts. They're already implementing this program in Europe, and it's known as FANS, Future Air Navigation System. And one of the concerns you talked about was how long it would take air traffic control to type in their instructions to an aircraft, and how long it would take an air crew to reply to that message by typing it in the FMS. That could probably be put at ease. What they're doing with this is using canned messages. So air traffic control would have a list of messages they could select from that are already pre-typed and send it to your aircraft, which would show up in your FMS, and you would have pre-canned responses to select from, where you could accept the ATC instruction or reject it. Also, this wouldn't be replacing voice communications completely. You could still speak with air traffic control over the radio, which could provide an advantage when frequencies are congested, because you wouldn't have to wait for an opening on the frequency to talk to air traffic control. You could send them an FMS message, or if your cockpit workload was so big where you didn't want to look down at the FMS, you could still use the voice communications. The other concern you brought up with this was situational awareness, that you would lose situational awareness by not being able to hear other pilots talk to ATC, and you wouldn't hear the instructions that are being sent to other aircraft by ATC. And I agree that's definitely a valid concern that I think the FAA should look at. Perhaps this can be alleviated by modern avionics, implementing new systems in the aircraft. These days we have TCAS, where obviously we didn't used to have that, so you can see the aircraft around you and get resolution advisories if you're on a collision course with another aircraft. I know ADS-B is starting to be very popular, which perhaps a new technology could be up and coming that could show pilots more of what's going on around them to alleviate the loss of situational awareness by hearing ATC instructions by other aircraft. Anyway, I wanted to record this to give you some feedback on some information that I had. Hopefully you find it useful. I started listening to your show a couple months ago, and I really enjoy it, and look forward to listening to more podcasts, and maybe I'll send in some feedback again in the future.
Thanks, Mechanic Bob, for your feedback. Do appreciate it. And interesting, the presentation you went to regarding FANS, or Future Air Navigation System. Well, we've used a system, a controller to pilot. Let's see, what's it called? Let me get the exact terminology. Controller Pilot Data Link Communication, CPDLC, for quite some time in getting oceanic clearances. But and I agree with you, there are some areas in Europe where they're trying to implement this system. It says I'm looking at a Wikipedia article on FANS. ATC services are now provided to FANS 1/A equipped aircraft in other oceanic airspaces, such as the North Atlantic. Of course, that's what I just mentioned. However, although many of FANS 1/Alpha's known deficiencies with respect to its use in high-density airspace were addressed in later versions of the product, it has never been fully adopted for use in continental airspace. The International Civil Aviation Organization work continued after FANS 1 were announced and continued to develop the concepts. And the Aeronautical Telecommunications Network is preferred for continental airspace and is currently being deployed in the core European airspace by Eurocontrol agency under the Link 2000 Plus program. Mandatory carriage of the ICAO compliance system is now the subject of an implementing rule for aircraft flying above flight level 280 issued by the European Commission. So, essentially, when we're yes, this technology has been in use for quite some time. I have no problem with its use in obtaining oceanic clearances, and maybe not quite so much of a problem of implementing this kind of system in the high altitude sectors, like above flight level, in the upper 30s or something like that, when urgent communications are not necessary. But and in this article, they have a very a good background on different types of control. And it says aircraft are operated using two major methods: positive control and procedural control. Positive control is used in areas which have radar and is so commonly referred to as radar control. The controller sees the airplanes in the control area and uses VHF voice to provide instructions to the flight crews to ensure separation. Because the position of the aircraft is updated frequently and VHF voice contact timely, separation standards, the distance one aircraft must be separated by another is less. This is because the air traffic controller can recognize problems and issue corrective directions to multiple airplanes in a timely fashion. Separation standards are what determines the number of airplanes which cannot occupy a certain volume of airspace. Procedural control is used in areas, either oceanic or land, which do not have radar. The FANS concept was developed to improve the safety and efficiency of airplanes operating under procedural control. This method uses time-based procedures to keep aircraft separated. The separation standard is determined by the accuracy of the reported positions, the frequency of the reports, and timeliness of communication with respect to intervention. So essentially what they're saying is this system, and I have no problem with using this controller to pilot data link system for uncontrolled, non-radar, not uncontrolled, but procedural control, areas where airplanes are farther apart, they're not covered by radar, there's no, the urgency of having voice communications is not so important. Now, the problem that I do have with implementing the system in all aspects, including positive control, is the fact that timeliness. It's absolutely critical that we have the ability to communicate in a very timely way. It's also incumbent upon, if we had this just data link program and not voice, because we can't hear what other people are saying, we're isolated to a one-on-one conversation between air traffic control and our own airplane, and we can't hear anybody else. That means that air traffic control has to be very proactive by telling me that, oh, by the way, about 20 miles ahead, you're going to hit moderate turbulence. You may want to have your flight attendants and passengers seated. It's incumbent upon and obligatory for pilots to continually make PIREPs to let other people, to let air traffic control know when we're in areas with turbulence that could be dangerous. Okay, so there are some things that have to happen for this to work. Weather deviations. A lot of times we'll be flying along and I'll hear somebody request a deviation for weather, and then you go, "Oh, what is he talking about? Let me turn the radar on. Oh, look at that. There's some weather up here." So that's an important part of voice communications. And then, of course, in the terminal area, I think that there's absolutely no way to implement data link text messages only in the terminal area. You have to know, you have to hear who has been cleared for takeoff, who has been given crossing instructions. Because the human element here, somebody's going to make a mistake. The more people that are listening, the more people that can catch the mistake, and the more safety is enhanced. So again, I don't mind this as being a system used in certain limited situations, or a system that is used as a backup to normal voice communications. But again, in my opinion, it's not a good idea. It's going to decrease safety, not enhance it, if we implement this as a replacement for voice communications. And I feel very strongly about that. And but thanks anyway, Mechanic Bob, for your feedback and your reflections on the fan system. I do appreciate it. It looks like I'm running out of space on my hard drive for the video, so it looks like I'm going to have to cut this thing off. I know there is a lot of feedback yet from a lot of you that I haven't addressed yet. Again, I'll do my best. And in the meantime, hoping that you have a great weekend and a great week. And until next time, on the next episode of Airline Pilot Guy, wishing you unlimited visibility. Wait a minute. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Take care, and God bless.
Good day.